Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Patch 11.1 finally has made its way over to the PTR realms, which gives us a chance to get a bit of a preview around how some of our classes are looking to change and evolve and potentially even get revamped for the next seasonal content of the War Within expansion. There's a ton of different revamps on the horizon, from hunters, mages, priests, but also the class of shaman as well, seeing a noticeable number of changes. I would even argue that so far in the War Within expansion, Shaman has had an excellent start during Season 1. All three specs from Elemental, Enhancement, and Restoration are all performing rather well, especially when it comes to the PvE side of things of WoW. So raids, dungeons, open world content, delves, the class can do all of it rather well, and it's quite a popular pick amongst many players, pushing some of the highest and some of the most difficult content out there. And I guess the question is the class going to be able to retain the popularity heading forward into Season 2? Hard to say about Resto and Elemental in particular, but it looks like the Enhancement Shaman is only growing stronger going forward, as they're making arguably one of the best melee classes in the game, potentially even better heading into the patch 11.1 if the tuning treats them favorably. By no means is the build final, but I did want to take a look at all the new Shaman changes arriving so far for 11.1 on PTR. As always, if you want to see more regular updates for 11.1 PTR stuff, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe, but otherwise, let's dive right in. Now, Shamans, before we get into some of the more generalist changes, Shamans are receiving quite a visual change this time around from some of your spells, abilities, but also your tier set. If you're a fan of this whole lightning, knight in shining armor type of meta look, you're probably a big fan of this type of a set. But if you're someone who loves the original Shaman sets, you're probably wondering to yourself, why does my shaman look like a cyborg? This doesn't really have any goblin-inspired feeling behind it. It looks almost like almost looks like time lost. It's not quite within WoW universe of this original shaman. It is completely different, but I don't hate it necessarily. I don't think it's my favorite shaman set. I like shaman sets where shamans look like shamans, if anything, but this is a decent set overall. Now, visually, I do love this, however. Shaman's getting new looks on their lightning bolt ability, and I'll try to see if I can get away so I don't have any other projectiles in between of me, but the lightning bolt, oh, it looks so good. Look at this. You're literally conjuring lightning from the ground, and even the bolt that you shoot out is also a little different. It's more like a proper bolt, not quite a lightning that just extends between you and the ally, but a proper bolt that flies at the target. I love this altogether. Chain lightning looks exactly the same, so if you're a big fan of this original feel about Shaman, chain lightning stays as is, but the new lightning bolt, I'm a fan. You can let me know if you hate it or if you love it. Hopefully there's a lot of glyphs so you can get the original lightning bolt. In fact, I hope they add a glyph where you can get the original classic lightning bolt, the upgraded version, which is like a beam from your hand to the target, but also this new one so you can switch them around. I think customization overall will be very, very good. Outside of this, Shaman, besides the new lightning bolt, in their class talents, the only talent they're lost so far is Ancestral Guidance. Their reasoning for it is primarily for Restoration Shaman. It's basically like their version of Ascendance, and they feel like it's kind of does two roles, or does the same role for Restoration in particular. For Enhancement and Elemental, that doesn't mean you lose some utility, but they wanted to upgrade your basic hybrid capabilities in terms of off-healing, quote-unquote. Most of it is between either buffing the healing of Enhancement Shaman abilities like your Healing Surge, and as well as the Elemental version of it, but also making Mana Tide or Healing Stream Totem a little better, and apparently got buffed up by 80% or 100% depending on your spec. But yeah, I that's the most you get when it comes to utility, when it comes to group healing. I guess the totem does end up healing every 1.6 seconds, so it is at least a fairly active ability. I do wish it healed 2 targets instead of 1, and maybe they'll end up buffing it further, but yeah, you're losing out quite a bit of that group utility on the DPS specs. As for the individual class specs, we have Elemental, which starts out with not a lot of changes, at least so far in the patch 11.1. The only major one is to their passive of, and sometimes it just doesn't show the ability name, Deeply Rooted Elements. So this effect now, you used to have a flat % chance anytime you spend Maelstrom to activate Ascendance, but now it is a specific % chance per Maelstrom spent. So each Maelstrom you spend on an ability gives you a specific chance per Maelstrom spend on to grant you Ascendance. This is primarily to make talents like Elemental Blast a little bit better. A lot of Shamans have been switching over to Earthshock because one, it's cheaper, two, it lets you send out as many Maelstrom abilities as possible between that and Earthquake, so you can rapid fire them to hopefully chain more procs of deeply rooted elements. But if you were playing on Elemental Blast, you on average cast less Elemental Blast than Earthshocks, so they wanted to make Elemental Blast a little bit better. So now this working off of your Maelstrom spent allows the 80 Maelstrom committed into Elemental Blast to go a little bit longer and compared to the 55 spent on a Maelstrom for your Earthshock. So hopefully you should be able to normalize your uptime and Ascendance whether you play one ability or the other. From there, I do want to move on to Restoration really quickly because Enhancement is getting a fairly decent bulk of these changes, so which is not really uncommon either. That's kind of how Enhancement has worked so far for a good bit. They're changing a bunch of things with Restoration, which is why you're seeing my talents being a little bit adjusted here, because they changed the position of many of those as well. But one of the things I wanted to do for Restoration is to remove at least one keybind out of the spec. I guess technically two, since Ancestral Guidance is no longer there, but they also wanted to remove the ability of Mana Tide Totem. The basically Healing Tide Totem is the one that heals your allies, while Mana Tide helps your allies recover mana, and they wanted to combine them together. So Mana Tide Totem can actually be part of the Healing Tide Totem specifically. So whenever you drop a Healing Tide Totem, you also increase allies mana, combining both abilities together, which I guess helps out a little bit when it comes to managing all those keybinds, which Shamans definitely are rich in terms of amount of keybinds you get to play into. This also means that Spirit Walker's Tide Totem works off of your Healing Totem instead of off of your Mana Totem, so you could either choose to get more mana, or after using Healing Tide Totem, then the cast time of your next 3 Healing Surges is reduced, but also the mana cost is also reduced. So I guess this is the talent that plays around your mana options a little bit, either continuous mana regen while the totem is up, or a little bit extra reduction on mana while also making Healing Surges more effective. From there, we also got another fun talent, which I actually really like. It's off of Earth and Harmony, and it's an upgrade talent. Normally can be upgraded with Reactive Warding, but they also gave you, I think, what looks like a better talent of Therazane's Resilience. Earth Shield and Water Shield no longer lose charges and are 150% more effective. Just the fact that you don't have to refresh the charges on your Earth Shield, which is just a buff. It never falls off. I guess it can be removed by other classes in PvP, for example, with the Purge, but just being able to apply it and keep it there, I think is super, super nice. So now it just constantly will heal the target, so it never has to remove any of the charges. Same thing goes for your Water Shield. It's just constantly there. Even though it looks like it has stacks right now, it shouldn't be depleted at all based on this talent. They also wanted to remove the ability of Primordial Wave. They're actually redesigning that ability for all the Shaman specs to make it less of a combo ability where you have to use it and now you're primed for a big ability and then you have to follow up. They're trying to reduce the globals you need to use as a Shaman. So for Resto, they're actually changing it with Whispering Waves. 10% of healing waves. Healing is just duplicated to each of a target with Riptide, which we've seen in classes with these type of mechanics. Monk is one of those where it allows you to use one of your basic single target heals to also duplicate a portion of it to AoE heal multiple allies with the similar healing over time effect. So this is something that's now going to be part of that Restoration Shaman kit. So I think it also makes the Riptide talent and Riptide spread talent and healing over time effects just a little bit stronger. They also wanted to make waves Speaker's Blessing a little bit better. It now additionally increases the periodic healing of your Riptide by 10 and 20% depending how many talent points you put into it. And also they adjusted the talents where Riptide is one of your first heal abilities going into Healing Stream Totem and Healing Rain, and you'll notice that the Healing Wave ability is now something that's naturally learned by the Restoration Shaman, which helps you invest or reinvest rather those talent points somewhere else into your talent tree to hopefully give you a little bit more flexibility with your builds. Though a huge portion of this update focused on redesigning Enhancement just a little bit. It doesn't mean that they're going to be weaker, as some of the classes with the reworks actually getting toned down a little. Enhancement is changing by quite a bit. First of all, and this is a pretty big one, they wanted to make sure, because Shaman so far has been very much dominated by the Stormkeeper playstyle. All of your Maelstrom spenders from Lightning Bolts, Chain Lightnings, and Tempest in particular are all highly, highly effective. Very, very strong abilities overall. And that made Shamans feel like, okay, my melee abilities don't feel as effective. It just feels like they're there just for me to have to build my resources. That's all they essentially do. Is there a way for these abilities to be a little bit more impactful and stronger? Because there's so many talents that synergize with your physical damage and abilities, but recently it feels like they've all become Maelstrom builders rather than hard hitters on their own. So they actually wanted to make those abilities hit harder. All Shaman basic abilities, from your Storm Strike to your Lava Lash to the Ice Strike ability, all of those have been buffed up by 100%, just dealing far more damage than ever before. The ability of Elemental Blast also feels like it's been falling behind a little, so they buffed this one up by about 20%. Also, Crash Lightning not only has a new animation, as you can see here, no longer is it just like a random little swipe across the board with your Shaman. Now you actually stomp down with this cool lightning effect. It looks sick, and it still has a whole cleavy element for your Crash Lightning, but yeah, the ability also initial damage increased by 200%. So it might be an ability you might actually want to use fairly regularly, because it does what? 211,000 damage. This does 240. This does 477. So they are changing things by quite a bit, and I guess you are going to be rewarded for using some of those combat abilities a little bit more. However, there's also going to be a bit of a give and a take with Shaman. While your basic combat abilities and physical damage hitters are getting stronger, some of your magical components are getting reduced a little, like your Feral Spirits, specifically when you play around with Elemental Spirits. Feral Spirits, on average, grant you normally 20% physical damage increase, but Elemental Spirits change from 20% physical to 20% magical, buffing Lightning, Frost, or Nature. But they're actually adjusting it a little bit by reining back some of those Maelstrom Spender abilities of Enhancement to bolster the physical damage by allowing Elemental Spirits to buff 10% physical damage and 10% random element depending what the Feral Spirit becomes. So you always have a physical component included on top of a magical component, but that magical component you're not nearly as strong. So it's a little bit of an adjustment that we've seen here with Shaman, which means that physical playstyles could potentially be a little bit better on their own, but even if you play Lightning, Nature, Fire, Frost, all those things, they're still effective. You'll just want to supplement it with some physical melee damage on top of it as well. This is going to impact Shamans differently whether it comes to dungeons or raids or content like PvP specifically. And you also notice that they actually changed the look of the talent tree quite a bit, and there's a bunch of different additions to the talents in terms of some of the effects and some of the redesigns, like Molten Assault, for example. They've added in so Flame Check can spread to 5 nearby targets instead of 4. Abilities like your Ice Strike and Ice Knife both generate Maelstrom, so they're both a little bit more even to one another, generating 1 Maelstrom every time you use them. They've also changed the visual of the ability of Fire Nova, which I actually haven't got to preview before until now. Yeah, it actually does look a little different. Now it's like an explosion that fires upwards rather than the original explosion that fires outwards from the target. The upgrade talent that works off of Sundering below with Molten Thunder has also got changed a little bit. The CD of Sundering is still reduced by 10 seconds, can no longer incapacitate, but Sundering now has a 40% chance to reset its own cooldown, increased by 12% for up to 5 targets, so I guess the more enemies you hit, the higher the chance to reset. However, each consecutive reset reduces those chances by half, so you actually can go full on like ook mode on your Shaman and just sunder, and then continue to sunder. I think so far I've been able to reliably get about 3 sunders, at least 2 sunders back to back, but a lot of times 3. I don't think I've gotten too many 4s, and I don't think I've gotten too many 5s, but if you really like RNG classes, Enhancement Shaman is embracing a little bit of that RNG with Sunder. Speaking of Sunder, Flashing Flames also has gotten updated where Lava Lash and Sundering increase the damage of Flame Shock effects on its target by 100% for 20 seconds. So if you're trying to, let's say, debuff a single enemy with a Lava Lash to make him take more damage, you will just Lava Lash him. But if you want to hit everybody with it, you'll just Sunder everybody at the same time, which is going to make some of those Fire builds and Flame Shock builds and builds that play around the Flame Shock playstyle just a little bit more effective. From there, we got some of the lower tier talents here, like Legacy of the Frost Switch, where consuming 10 stacks of Maelstrom weapon will reset the cooldown of Storm Strike, increases the damage of your physical and Frost abilities by 25%. The single point is now going to be 15%, so if you want to dive into a little bit more physical and Frost damage, you now can, but if you want to increase it further to 25, you also can do so. but that initial 15 seems like a bigger value increase than having to go, you know, plus 15, then plus 10 on top of that. So even putting 1 point into Legacy of the Frost Witch could potentially open up some physical and frost damage builds as well. Outside of this, we also got some major changes to Primordial Wave. It is no longer a primer ability. You no longer use it to put up a flame shock on the target and then your next lightning bolt will arc towards every target with a flame shock. Instead, it'll just immediately blast every target that's afflicted by a flame shock. So if I pop all these trained dummies here in AoE, Lava Lash them to spread my flame shock, make it a little bit of distance so you can see what this ability looks like, and then fire off from a distance, you can see all those hits fire off at the same time. You also actually have a follow-up damage ability that does AoE damage to every enemy around you on your Shaman, which looks sick as hell, because the upgrades for this one, Primordial Wave, have changed quite a bit. With Splintered Elements, Primordial Wave will still grant you haste for every target hit, but then you have Primordial Storm. After using Primordial Wave, it then transforms into a single-use Primordial Storm for 15 seconds, where you devastate all enemies within Primordial Storm, dealing Flame Strike damage, Frost Strike damage, and Storm Strike. What's important here is when it says Flame Strike, Frost Strike, and Storm Strike, because it has a strike component, that means it'll gain benefits from the magic element like Storm, Nature, Frost, Flame, but also physical damage components because it has a strike element to it. So it gets benefits from both, dealing damage and unleashing a lightning bolt or chain lightning at 150% effectiveness to those targets, dealing reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So it's like a big primer AoE ability. So if you want to pick up Primordial Wave, on its own, it does decent bit of damage, but if you want to follow up with the second one, Primordial Storm, it also does the same. This one consumes Maelstrom weapons, so you can use this to prime 5 Maelstrom stacks and then consume immediately for big AoE. It's kind of a cool ability. I've been playing around with it. The damage of this one is separated and segmented, so you can kind of see a little bit of damage here and there. I'm sure if you were to combine it in one single bar, it'll be fairly significant, well, a lot further up, but you can kind of see the damage that it could do to all enemies around you. And with a roughly 30-second cooldown, it is an ability that seems quite effective when it comes to overall AoE. Outside of this, Enhancement Shaman's Totemic playstyle has also gotten some changes. Totemic looks like is a big focus this time around for the patch 11.1. Totemic does have some RNG gameplay elements within single target in the current live realms of the War Within for Season 1 in 11.07, but they're trying to make Totemic a little bit more just overall effective, trying to shore up some of the talents that players normally wouldn't pick up, trying to nerf some of the talents that are overused, and trying to make Totemic just a little bit better on its own, as well as increasing its functionality, which I'm a huge fan of. First of all, Totemic whole right-hand side can actually be skipped out completely, with some Shaman builds not even investing too much into a full fire-based build, so lively totems as well as reactivity can kind of sort of be a little bit less effective overall as a talent combo to a degree. So they're trying to make the Searing Bolt from Lively Totems deal 40% more damage and Searing Volley deal 40% more damage on top of it. Overall, I'd say the Searing Totem is a little better. It does slightly more damage. In a dungeon run, it does about between 5 as well as 4% of your damage, so it's kind of okay just as a talent on its own. It may have some decent or different value within pure single target, but at times it can do a decent bit of damage, which is nice to see. With the Totemic talent of Oversurge, they're trying to reduce some of this RNG elements where Shamans were able to use this in single target with Ascendants to juice up their totem, where they reduced the damage of certain totem during Ascendants down to 50%, where initially it was about 150%, to try to make the other playstyle of Amplification Core, I think, just a little bit better. With the talent of Reactivity, the Hot Hand, while it's active, Lava Lashes now shatter Earth, causing Sundering at 50% effectiveness instead of 30% effectiveness, which is quite a noticeable change when it comes to your overall AoE damage and how quickly you can spam those Lava Lashes while the totem is active. However, with the talent of Resurge, where Sundering causes your totem to also tremor, that effectiveness has been reduced from 200% down to 100%, so they're buffing the effectiveness of the Sundering but nerfing some of the Resurge values, so some of those specific synergies are being reduced. That being said, you also do have those resets on your Sundering with the totem, so that can achieve quite a significant bit of overall damage whenever you do use it, because you can get one slam, didn't actually get a proc there. Of course I wouldn't get a proc. Yeah, when you start to play a class with a bunch of RNG, yeah, stuff like this is definitely going to happen. But if you can get a bunch of those tremor procs back to back, that could be a significant bit of damage. But also you do have this flame lash, or lava lash rather, sunder from your totem. So there is quite a few combinations and quite a few synergies that you can utilize here at the very least. They also are trying to work on trying to give certain totem an ability to move it. Now, right now, this doesn't work, but it's very, very similar to the ability of, if you could find it here, Totemic Projection. Totemic Projection is great and is a must-have if you're playing the Totemic build, because it allows you to move all of your totems to a different location, with certain totem being effective, but not a mobile totem that doesn't travel with your target. It is a totem, it stays in place. You do need to move it periodically, especially in some of the high mobility fights, or maybe a mechanic comes out, like a Mythic Plus, right? And the tank needs to immediately move over to the other side, drag all the adds with them, and to leave your totem back there is a little unfortunate. Things like that do happen. Part of the reason why Totemic isn't as much played within currently Mythic Plus, but they're trying to give certain totem an ability to, once you place it, that ability then, while the totem is active, becomes specifically another version of your totem projection, just to move Surging Totem every 6 seconds off GCD. So Surging Totem is just going to not require you to make a second keybind or anything like that. Surging Totem just becomes move totem button while the totem is active, and when it disappears, it allows you to replace a new one. So you should have a lot more control of this totem. So if you need to move it at a moment's notice, every 6 seconds, you can adjust it and move it. And I think that's going to help out with the usability of this totem. It does mean as a shaman, you'll have an ability to use in between of your GCDs to kind of spam micro and move the totem constantly. It may even get annoying in some cases, but this is at least better than nothing. At least you'll have a little bit more freedom to adjust where the totem goes. But if I were to combine it all together with all the rest of these changes, right now, Enhancement is feeling very, very good to play. Outside of a couple of dungeons when you get like really high MS, because at times I've noticed the combat in 11.1 feels a little bit more sluggish than I like to compared to live realms at the very least. So it is very noticeable in terms of how, I guess it's almost like combat feels a little slower, a little bit more like your keyboard is pressing into putty. But outside of the various random lag on PTR, this spec feels great, especially in this Totemic playstyle. It does a ton of damage, and the fact that your Lava Lashes, if I could go right here, can crit for up to 8 million or 4 million is pretty wild. This physical damage increase, this combat ability, damage buffs they've added really do feel noticeable, and combined together with Totemic in particular, with this whole Lava Lash hot hand playstyle, it gives you a very fast-paced build that kind of goes away from the lightning and the thunder and tempest, but instead kind of repositions it towards Surging Totem, Sunders, and Lava Lashes, which are incredibly satisfying, while still letting abilities like Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolts, and as well as new Primordial Wave ability really shine overall, and it feels incredibly good to play. That's one of the things, though, that I think a lot of people have expected out of this next patch. With Shaman doing as well as they have so far for the patch 11.07, or Season 1 of War Within, a lot of players expected for Enhancement, Resto, and Elemental to possibly take a bit of a breather in Season 2, or at least be a little bit less prominent. However, this tuning is by no means final, by the way, and maybe there's some kind of like a bug, like an obvious one, or not an obvious one that I'm just not aware of, that's causing Shamans to do more damage than anything. But any group that I'm in that has an Enhancement Shaman, they're just shredding everything all across the board. They seem to be extremely effective in any kind of setup. Big AoE, small AoE, single target fights, they seem to be highly, highly effective at all of them, with many Shamans now picking up instead of Tempest going into the Totemic playstyle. And as soon as the Totemic gets that free move search totem button added towards its playstyle, I think it's going to feel even better than before. But even right now, it's not super difficult to reposition that totem. It is a pain sometimes to have to do that, depending on mechanics, or if you have to run out, or if enemies have to move, then yeah, you gotta drag the totem, but then they move again. So something like that does come in, but as soon as they add that extra button every 6 seconds, I think the spec is going to feel better. If you picked up a Shaman as your potential main in Season 1, you've probably been enjoying it a ton so far, and we're wondering how it's going to perform in Season 2. By no means are any of these changes final, and the tuning is by no way officially over, but the way that the class plays right now over in patch 11.1 PTR, at least when it comes to testing in dungeons, it is slamming. It does a ton of damage, and that Surging Totem button seems to do a bunch for the Shaman, but also all of your basic combat abilities also feel very, very good to play with as well. As always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys did enjoy this update for the patch 11.1. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate it. Also, join our Discord community if you want to see more regular updates about 11.7, which I post on there pretty regularly, or as regular as I can, chatting up with our community. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below as well, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.